Thank you, Candace, and thank you for all of you who have joined us for this webinar. I'm really honored to be invited to participate in offering this to you before the holidays, recognizing that not only is this a busy time of year, but also for all of you who have experienced the loss of a loved one, it could be a very, very difficult time, whether it has been a recent loss or a loss from several years ago. But one of the things that I want to begin with as we start this is to really, oops, I'm sorry, I will back up right here, to really honor the different traditions in which we all may come. Some of us may come from a faith tradition in which we celebrate Christmas. Others of you may even have just finished Hanukkah. Others of you may not come from a faith tradition, but yet the holidays of celebrating Christmas or even having friends or family members who are Muslim. We all come with different traditions. We also come with different cultures. I live here in Minnesota, of where a lot of Scandinavians live, and I'm not Scandinavian, but I have come to learn and appreciate it. So I just want to name and to honor and recognize whatever the traditions that we come from and the cultures that we come from. We may be different in that respect, but the one thing that we come in common with, especially for those of you who've experienced the loss of a loved one from myocarditis, is that you know what it means to lose someone that you love, whether it has been a son or a daughter, a mother or father, sister, brother, or even a friend. What you do share in common is that loss of a loved one. And during these holidays, it is, which is a very special time, the grief at times, I'm sure, can feel really quite overwhelming. And as a result, you may even find yourself feeling like one of these characters. I said before we started this webinar to Candace, I said I may be dating myself, but I grew up with Mr. Magoo, but this is the character of Mr. Magoo, but he's playing the character of Scrooge. Sometimes we may find ourselves, whether we've lost a loved one or not, sometimes we may want to say bah humbug to this holiday, or may even find ourselves like the Grinch, where everybody is feeling really happy that we're not quite there. Or we may find ourselves like George Bailey from the movie It's a Wonderful Life, of where his life was turned upside down. And so it is through all of those experiences, it's really hard for us to really get into the spirit of what other people are experiencing. What I have found is that all three of these characters, even though they are different, what they too have in common is they had a significant event, life change in their lives, and it caused them to have pause to reflect on the past and the present and the future. They found time that through these changing events in their own lives, they had to reprioritize of what's really important. And it also provides them an opportunity to refocus on what they still have. One of the things when I'm working here in the hospital, and for several of our patients and families when they are here in the hospital, and also when I work with the grief support groups, I remind patients and families that we can choose to go through these holidays alone. But I'm also reminded that even for Mary and Joseph, God knew that they needed others to be with them. And so God sent angels and shepherds and eventually the wise men with gifts to come and give Mary and Joseph the support that they needed. Now, of course, they could have rejected the support of these strangers, but they had no idea what was going to be happening for them in the future. But they experienced this outpouring of love and support, and they were given that gift and given that taste that we don't need to go through life alone, and that sometimes we find ourselves that we want to do things alone. But it's my hope for you that during this holiday season that you may be open to the angels and the shepherds who might come to you in the weeks ahead, who want to just be there with you through this time. You know, for myself, During the holiday time, I like to do a lot of baking, a lot of cooking. It's only the time of year where I try these traditional things that I make every year. As I said, growing up here in Minnesota, I'm surrounded by lots of Scandinavian folks, and this past week my daughter and we made 400 pieces of lefse, and we're not even Scandinavian, but there's something about just but doing the holiday baking. I've used the recipe as a metaphor, an analogy of describing grief and loss during the holidays as a metaphor. And these next few slides, I'm going to be reflecting a little bit of that with you. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the book called Tears Soup, but it's an excellent resource and an excellent book that tells a story of a woman who's experienced a loss, and she talks about her journey of making this tears soup. It's an excellent book. Give yourself a gift if you're looking for a good book during the holiday time. But again, the recipe is as I use that metaphor during this presentation to be reminded that each of you, your grief and your experience of your loss is very unique. Someone once said that loss and grief is as unique as individual fingerprints or as individual snowprints or individual snowflakes. So again, the recipe is not a prescription, but rather a mixture of ingredients and directions that are uniquely tailored to you. In any recipe, you have the ingredients, the directions, baking instructions, decorating, and then once you're done preparing, it's ready to serve. So when I think about what are the ingredients that one needs to help cope better through the holidays after experiencing a loss, I know when I get ready to do my baking, I have to go to the cupboard and check the inventory of what ingredients do I have. One of the important things going through the holidays is to plan. We all just finished the holiday celebrations of Thanksgiving, and I'm not sure what that experience was like for each and every one of you, but you might have done some planning and anticipation of what that gathering might have been like. But in the next, couple of weeks with Christmas and with even New Year's and the New Year beginning, both of those times, it's just to really plan what are the gatherings, what are the things, what is it that I need to get through during all of this. Again, this is an additional time where things are really busy. We are already between whatever our household responsibilities are and our work experience or family life, we add extra stress to our lives during this time, whether it's the extra shopping, the special events or parties, the extra cooking and the baking or the cleaning and getting ready for guests, even decorating the house. All of these things really take a lot of energy to add to our already hectic life. And then to add it into the midst of grief, you may find yourself just totally exhausted, both physically, emotionally, and spiritually through this time. The other thing that holidays bring are expectations. A lot of times our family members, they mean well, but they may have great expectations for us and expect us to show up at all of those family gatherings just as if nothing had ever really happened. Well, a friend of mine once said that you don't know what your expectations are until they are not met. Again, for your family and friends, they may be inviting you to come and to be with them, and yet they may not fully understand how difficult that may be for you. The question I have for you as you are receiving those invitations or wondering what to do is this a place in which it feels safe? Is it a place in which I can be freely able to share my feelings? Can I name my loved one? Or do I have to pretend that loss did not happen? It's like that phrase of, we have an elephant in the room. Can we talk about this? Again, you are the only one who can determine if this is a place that will be honoring your feelings. And the last um, ingredient that I list there is the gift giving. Gift giving is one of those hard elements around the holiday times. Sometimes we may not feel like we are in the spirit. We may, just not feel like, do we have to do things this time? A few years ago, my daughter, who was only 10 at the time, she said, when we were going home after my dad had died, she said, Mom, it's not about the gifts. It's about just being with the family and the friends and having times in which we could share our memories. So again, to take inventory of what ingredients in your own life and in your own soul that might be really helpful for you to get through this holiday. With every recipe comes directions. And with those directions, I know for myself that when it comes to writing a recipe with directions, it is again one that you can write your own directions. Are there some things that are some steps that I really need to take? That's part of the preparation. Are there some steps that I can take? Are there some steps that I may accidentally miss? Or are there steps that I ought not to miss? And especially of this last one, sometimes I ask our families to think about, what would our loved one want? Would they want us to still do some of the same things as we have always done? And sometimes our spirit may not be really into it, but to be thinking about what they would want you to do, for us to do, and to think of it as a tribute or as a way to honor them. The other thing that I've alluded to already is we can be the only gauge to really assess how we are doing physically, emotionally, and spiritually during this time. In any baking, we have all experienced food that has been either undercooked or overcooked. We are the only ones who can really gauge what our temperature is. How much energy do we have? And this is a time where I say to many of the people that I work with that it is a time in which you can gift yourself and give yourself permission to say no. That we don't have to do all the things that other people want us to do, but at the same time we may find ourselves as saying, I may not want to do this, but maybe this is something I can do for my children or my grandchildren. Again, of honoring our loved one in response to that. After everything in terms of our cookies at our house were not done, we do like to decorate the cookies. I guess the question that might be helpful is to say, what is my hope? What would be the desired outcome? Do I just want to just kind of get through the holiday and just pretend that, it didn't really exist? Or, do I want to do a couple things? Do I want to be that Scrooge? Or would I rather, have something to a more positive outlook for this? But the important thing is to really honor the feelings that you do have. If you're feeling angry, even as a chaplain, I invite patients and family members to express their anger. Fortunately, the God that I experience is one who does allow those different feelings. And I think sometimes if we just are able to name some of those feelings and not to minimize them or dismiss them, there is some great freedom and a great gift that comes from it. The other is to allow those tears. Those tears have been given to us for a reason. And also to use this time to reflect about the past and to honor the present and also to hope the future. All of those are part of the decorating process, in my opinion, for helping us in our recipe and something that we may not want to omit from our recipe. And after we have done all of that work, there's a time in which we are ready to serve, that the holiday will come. And part of the planning is to say, are there some meaningful rituals that will give me great comfort and meaning. Have there been some things that we have done differently? I know several families who like to go and look at the lights, to drive through the town and to look through at the lights. Maybe others, have new charities that they want to gift. Maybe those rituals of just even continuing to go to church or not go to church at the same time that we always have done. Whatever is meaningful for you, to identify maybe one or two rituals that might help you get through this, to identify and to plan and participate. But maybe there are some rituals that you don't want to keep. And again, that too is okay to do. Again, sometimes we don't even know what our rituals are until we come to the holiday and remember, and we recall some of the memories, and Christmas doesn't feel like Christmas unless you have done some of those things. I'd like to share with you, as so many of the families that I have worked with have shared with me some of their stories, and one of the things that has helped them get through this time is to also create some new traditions. Some of them, they keep some of the old traditions, and some they let go. But a number of families, again, it may be after 6 months after their loss or even a couple years afterwards, start some new traditions. The first one is of a family who the woman who shared the stories with me, it was her husband who was killed in a car accident, and she had 4 young daughters. And as we were having coffee, I just encouraged her. I said, just have a light or a candle be burning. Whatever room, if it's in the family room or in the dining room, to have a candle to symbolically represent your loved one. She shared with me after Christmas, you wouldn't believe how many candles we have gone through during this holiday season, but it brought great comfort because they could feel their loved one's spirit being present. Another family, one of the first funerals that I did of a child, the family had their child buried. They just knew that it would be too hard for that first Christmas to be at home. Another family had shared with me their son was died from death from suicide, and the mom decided that Christmas that she would go through some of her son's things and invite some of his friends over, and to, with a special note, give special gifts to some of the friends. Again, cherishing the memories of the significance of the gift, of the object, but also of just thanking the friends to be there as well. Another family, their father was a chef, and the daughters made a decision that for that holiday they were going to go through his old cookbooks and try some of the things that he had marked, but they never had an opportunity to try some of those foods. For another family who experienced the loss, they had met so many people through their hospital journey or as they were dealing with cancer. And so I don't have pictures of a luminary, but they took paper bag luminaries and placed them outside their home. And on each paper bag, they wrote the name of some of the people that they met along the journey. I know a number of you through myocarditis have networked with other people throughout this journey, where a lot of people don't understand what you're going through, but think about the number of people that you have met along this journey. Another family, they only had one son, but he was killed in a car accident, and they were very intentional for that first holiday to do something that would make their son proud of them. And so they volunteered at the Salvation Army and chose to serve Christmas dinner. And even afterwards, as hard as it was for them during that holiday, they just kept reflecting, this is something we've talked about doing as a family, but my son died way too young, but yet we did it in a way to honor him. Again, for all of you, sometimes you may just wonder, am I really going to make it through the holiday, especially if it's the first holiday or a special occasion that you're going through. The first year can be hard. Sometimes even the second and third year can be hard as well. And what's difficult in that second and third year, as some of you may know, is people stop asking the question, how are you? But believe in yourself that you will be able to get through this, and to just allow the spirit of the love of the person that you cared for so much, that spirit is still living in your heart. And even as your prayers, maybe sometimes our words cannot always describe what it is that we are needing, but to allow your tears to be a form of a prayer. And in the movie of the Polar Express, the little boy didn't really believe that this was truly Santa and that he was going to make it through. But again, he was reassured that, yes, you will make it through, and yes, it is okay to believe that you can do this. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to put in one of my favorite cartoons for this time of the year, especially for loss and grief. I haven't gotten the copyright permission yet. But what it is I will just have to describe it to you. It's Santa who's in a confessional booth. And Santa is saying in that confessional booth, on several occasions this past year, I wasn't all that jolly. It is okay of not feeling jolly all the time. And I just, again, want to give you permission for having that, whatever, again, allowing whatever the feelings that you are. And as I get close to the end here before we open it up, I just also want to lift up that the movies that I started with at the beginning of The Grinch, his life, he started off with a very small heart because it was so hard for him to see everyone happy, but his life was changed at the end. His heart grew and he could be happy. Even Scrooge, he again was able to reprioritize life and again discover not so much of what he didn't have or what he did have, but he had taken so for granted, even some of his relatives, and he focused on, again, the gift of what he does have and to appreciate those around. Even George Bailey at the very end, after he looked at the past and the present and even explored the future, he too was able to have his life changed and to reprioritize of what he still had. And even his daughter, when he was asking what the meaning of the bell was, he learned from his daughter who said, Daddy, every time that you hear a bell ring at Christmas time, it's a reminder that an angel is getting one's wings. A few years ago, I created a document or just a reflection guide for patients and families here in the hospital. And it's something that I have used with many families, even in a grief support group. And those of you who are interested in receiving a copy of that, you can email Candace. But it's a guide for Christmas reflections, or reflecting on the memories and the traditions. And under each one of these categories are some different questions. Sometimes it's so hard to know what's the best way for us to really keep the spirit and the memory of our loved one present. And so these different questions may be a guide when you are gathered together as a family of recalling some of the earliest Christmas memories for yourself, the first memories with your loved one, and again, family members again love to tell those stories, and again, it's those memories that give us such a gift. We may recall some of the gifts that our loved ones have given to us, or maybe some of the favorite decorations that we made together, or maybe there have been certain foods that our loved one always had, or even to reflect on some of the traditions. For those of you who might have lost a spouse, maybe there have been some traditions that you have adopted that came from your spouse's family. again, what are some of the special music that your loved one enjoyed listening to, or the special movies and the stories, and maybe it's okay to just sit with the quietness and listen to some of those movies, or listen to some of that music or the movies, and read some of those stories. And again, to reflect on some of the special programs that you might have shared together. Again, you can email Candace, and she will forward you some of those questions. And then for my last slide, I would like to just encourage and to lift up of how one might be able to gift yourself. Just even participating in this webinar tonight, I'd like to think of it as a gift to yourself, of saying, I can network with others who know something of how hard it is of getting through this holiday time for you. And then also, what is one thing that you might want to do to honor your loved one? And to reflect on what is one thing that my loved one might say to you during this holiday time, or what might they want to hope for you to make it through this holiday season. So with that, I will conclude my presentation and invite those of you who are participating to share with you any thoughts or reflections, or even any questions, or to even maybe say if there is something that you are intentionally planning to do that might be in honor or tribute of your loved one, or whatever it is that you would like to share.
Ladies and gentlemen, all lines will now be in an open and interactive mode. To ensure the best audio quality, please use your mute button when you are not speaking. You may press 6-3 to mute your line and 6-6 to unmute.
So I'd like to invite you to share with Audrey any reflections on her presentation or about your loved one. At this time, you're certainly not required to, but I invite you to. So we'll give you a couple minutes to think about what it is you might want to say. And if there are no questions or comments, we can end at this time in a short period of time, but I want to give you a couple of minutes to think about whether or not there's something you would like to say. Audrey, are you able to see the comment in the chat box on the screen?
I do. Sometimes I feel guilty for going on and feeling happy. I really appreciate that question. And again, part of the last gifting to oneself, of where I reflected briefly in the sense of thinking, for your loved one, would they not want you to go on and to be happy? And to think that that is a way. There was one mother that I was working with, or it wasn't a mother, it was her husband who had died. And a year after her husband's death, she came up to me and she said, I read somewhere about how to, go through and to reorganize my life. But she said, by putting, I can make my husband proud of me, to be a good mother, to begin to feel happy, and to not necessarily forget him, but to, again, go on and not feel guilty of living in the midst of grief. And so she was a reminder to me that she gave herself that time and that permission. And the guilt is a shared feeling. And again, to think about the legacy that your loved one would want for you. I hope that that might be helpful. And then the other question was, why do others make me feel uncomfortable for still talking about my son? People, we live in a society in which it is really hard. We're a death-denying society in many ways. And so often we think that, after even after a couple weeks or even after a couple months, that our lives are supposed to, be back to whatever, a new kind of normal, and that it is very hard. And a lot of times people who have not experienced significant loss, they have no idea what it is that you are going through. And they are feeling uncomfortable. A lot of times they don't know what to say. They don't, they just, again, they may have grown up into a family in which you just don't talk about these things. But my hope would be is that you find some group of friends who, or even, it could be even strangers like angels or shepherds through a support group, or someone from your work group who has experienced a loss, where you can come together and just say, hey, I need to have 15 minutes here to just really talk about my son or about my loved one. Again, we all find out who those people which we feel comfortable with, in which that we feel safe with, and because it is very hard. And we learn, I think, usually quite quickly of those who can listen to our grief and pain and others who cannot. And sometimes it's the people in our own family or who we thought were our closest friends who have a real difficult time. I think the other thing that has been helpful for some people is to realize that, I'm sorry, so someone had just come into our room here. Excuse me for that. There are times where people in the workplace have found, that sometimes they don't like to be asked, how are you doing? And they have to always respond, I'm fine. But then they had a certain symbol, whether it was a rose or a flower or some sort of symbolic thing that they could put on their desk and saying, this is a hard day for me today. If you ask me, they kind of set up this parameters that, if you ask me or if you have 15 minutes or 10 minutes to allow me to talk about my loved one, I would appreciate it. So it was a nonverbal way of saying, I want to talk, or they could, turn the sign around or had a different symbol in which, this is just a very difficult day. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but I hope that that may be helpful. The support group Compassionate Friends to be especially helpful because they have all lost children or siblings and know what it is that you are going through. I, too, have been very impressed with a group of Compassionate Friends. And whether you have lost a child as a young child or even as an adult child, it is a wonderful support group because, again, you have that shared language of the shared experience of losing a child. And that's where, again, to find what are the support groups in your own community that are available. Unfortunately, not everybody may have a Compassionate Friends network in their own community. But it's also, if you even go to the websites, it tells you how you can begin one. Again, the hospice programs, most communities have support groups through their hospice programs. And especially even during the holiday times or different times a year, they have special events of bringing people together. Because as I work in the heart and lung transplant patients I do a support group for them, and I often reflect with them that they share the same language. When you have experienced the loss of a loved one, you share the same language that words don't even need to describe what you are going through. Someone once said that if we didn't love this person so much, it wouldn't hurt so much. So much of our grief and so much of our pain that we experience is because we took the risk to love that person. So again, to find, support groups, and it may be a support group of just even one or two people, but to meet together in which you can talk, and to share those times of where it's the hardest, of where you may find yourself having grief support, just to be reminded that you aren't alone. It's a really healthy way to get through this time. So I'm grateful that you were able to find compassionate friends, and I hear that from a number of parents who've lost a child, and again, to share that with others who may not know that information, of looking for the local support group for that. One of the things that Candace had mentioned, that in the next months ahead, that if it would be helpful for anybody to do another webinar on loss and grief, kind of take it to a different level or to a different area, to share any ideas or suggestions of what might be helpful for a webinar for those of you in this foundation or this network. I've done a couple different presentations for here at Mayo Clinic, and one is about dealing with the myths about grief. But there's a variety of different topics, so please feel free to share those ideas with Candace if it might be helpful.
I think if there are no other questions or comments, I think that we will end the presentation at this time with the invitation from Audrey that we will do another webinar on grief in the new year, and probably early in the new year. So I invite you to watch for that announcement. Again, let me reiterate that we will be editing out any personal information. Only the muted portion will be placed of this slide presentation will be placed on our website. And we are grateful that you took some time to be with us tonight, and we hope that that what Audrey has had to share with you has been helpful to you in some way. We at the Myocarditis Foundation care very much about you, and our hearts go out to you in your loss. And so on that note, I think we will end our presentation for this evening, and I thank you for being with us. Good night.
And my thoughts and prayers are with all of you as well. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude the webinar for today. We thank you for your participation and ask that you please disconnect your lines.